Hi, everybody. It's Saturday, December 14th. And this is Tinderbox Weekend with Michael Becker. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox. But here's Michael Becker.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's meetup. We typically go around the room when we have our meetups to first have new people introduce themselves. I don't see anybody new today. We then go around the room and have people talk about their projects and what they're working on. And then we delve into any theme that may have. This week, we don't have a theme. We might as well give some new updates as well. So we're going to modify, and we'll say this a couple times this year just to hopefully everyone recognizes it. So we're going to modify our schedule going into the new year. It will still be every other Saturday and every other Sunday, but we're going to slightly, I don't know the right word to say it. We're going to kick the new year off with the Saturdays being the first and third Saturday of every month, and the Sundays being the second and fourth Sunday of every month, because I've got a commitment now every second Saturday, and I don't want to have to miss that commitment and Tinderbox. So if we can skew them a little bit to my will, we will be able to have me involved on the second Saturday. So that would be great. The other thing, thanks to Art, we have now officially kicked off our Tinderbox for APAC meetup, so that our friends in the APAC region can actually, and or those that want to spend in the East Coast want to spend their Friday nights at 7 p.m. playing with Tinderbox, they certainly can. So we're going to do a first Friday of every month, 4 p.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. JST Japan time. So give or take for those in APAC, that should be able to hopefully suit them. Our first session of attempting that was last night, and it was just Art and me, but that's fine. But we had a rousing conversation for about an hour on thought leadership and theory around note taking, and then I dove into a step-by-step process of a time tracking utility and experience I've built in Tinderbox, and so I will be posting that, and you all can watch that later. Art, what was your reaction in last night's conversation in general?
It was great, actually. And I think we ended up doing a lot of things and touching on recapping stuff that was going on in the forums and, bits of our conversations over the last couple of months. So all in all, I had a great time. It was sort of in an informal interview of Michael Becker and his process as well. So those are a few more.
Awesome. So we'll be doing that. So long story short, in 2025, first and third Saturday of every month, fourth and second Sunday of every month, 9 a.m. Pacific to 10:30 Pacific, and then whatever time zone works for you around that. And then the first Friday of every month, 4 p.m. Pacific. And we'll post the files in the forum. Anybody, Steve, you got a question?
Yeah, you mentioned first and third and second and fourth Saturdays and Sundays. Some months have a fifth Sunday or Saturday.
Well, we'll figure that out. So I put them in the Google Calendar. So if you look at our calendar, and I automated it from that. So
okay,
we'll deal with that when those come. But generally speaking, let's go with that.
Why don't you put the calendar URL in the chat?
All right, I will do that. You're right, but there are always edge cases with things like this. So let me find it. Here is the calendar. And I think you can subscribe to the calendar and such. And I'll also be publishing in the calendar any classes or courses that I offer on the side. And again, this is a community calendar too. So as I say that, if there's anybody else in the community that wants to be offering courses or programs or doing things within the community and would like to have something published in the calendar, just fire it over to me and I'll add it to the calendar. Cool. So anything else? Those are kind of the public service announcements. Outside of that, anybody else have any topics that they want to discuss today?
Michael,
yes.
We were talking about a script that you have been discussing backstage. Aside from the particular script problem, maybe tell us about what you're doing. I know it doesn't work yet, but tell us what you're trying to do.
Yeah, well, I can show you examples of what I'm trying to do with different things. And this also aligns with kind of the thread that Jen kicked off with. Let me I can't click on links and find things at the same time. So this also kicks off a conversation that came out of the thread that Jennifer Marone had suggested around like, why are we doing this? And I really liked Paul Walter's comment, and that at the end of the day, it's about sense making. And then finding tools and services that help us make sense making. He had some really nice comments about the mechanical approaches of it too. And then I also interjected, in addition to like just trying to get stuff done, sometimes it's just fun. It's kind of sad and sick, but when I get really burnt out, I tend to turn to Tinderbox to like clear my mind and have some fun and play with some toys. So there's a little bit of that as well. But at the end of the day, what I'm really trying to accomplish, and so part of that fun part too, is wanting to learn R, wanting to learn, possibly Python at some point. And again, since I have everything, I do all of my work in Tinderbox, I try to automatically manage things. So if I can pass to an application like R, parameters that would produce a plot, which I can send, and I haven't actually done it yet, but I can configure files to send them to the command line, R triggers, and then I also got it figured out that R would then produce a graph for me, export that graph to a image on my hard drive, and then I could have Tinderbox know where that image is, and since I would have programmatically specified the name that image would have, I could then have that image automatically show up in my reports. So that way I could have, regression graphs and other kinds of things automatically show up in my reports by using R. And so all I needed to do was get that OSA script working. And then that would allow the run command to trigger the population of of an attribute with a file name. So that was part of it. And just to give people an example of not using the R strategy and all that, but I was playing with Vis.js, playing around with a similar methodology and trying to figure that out. So I was saying, like, let's say I have several tasks that need to get done. What I was able to do is create some action code that would structure those tasks in a way that would feed to the Vis.js Gantt chart output, the ability to render tasks. So then when I look at this, let me just make sure I'm rendering the right chart. So this is using posters, and then that renders a Gantt chart. So I'm trying to figure out different utilities, like either Vis.js, Plotly, a ggplot2, or a Mermaid, like we're talking about the Quattro R stuff. So I'm trying to get more and more of these more advanced visuals into my system, because I was talking, Art and I were talking about this last night. One of the amazing things with Tinderbox is, there are 10 inherent built views into Tinderbox that we can be using all the time. We can then build templates to create our own views, and we can use external JS files like Plotly or tools like R to create other visualizations. So in fact, if you have the fortitude to kind of play around with this stuff, you're able to create really an infinite number of visualizations from your data in Tinderbox, depending on what how far you want to go down the layering of working with these different tools. So that's what I was working on. And while I'm speaking on that, let me just show you one I downloaded from our session today that I want to figure out. One of our community members did this. Got to find it, which is really cool. He built a wrong file. Put it in the different place. I didn't think. Lessons learned. Ideas. Here's another great example. Great example. It's a pretty complicated file, but if you go down here, you'll notice how he's basically using Tinderbox to feed information into Quattro, which is a Pandoc-like tool. But one of the cool visualizations is he's using Mermaid, and so taking these notes here, he can then feed the parameters into a Mermaid visual and then that generates a workflow diagram. So it's like wickedly cool when you start seeing how you can transform attributes in Tinderbox, and we won't go through the details here, but you basically can transform the values of the attributes of these notes to provide the syntax that some of these visualization tools need. And this is basically posters on steroids, right? You create these visualizations that that these different visualization tools need, and then you get really cool output like this. So that's the kind of work I'm trying to do, Mark. It's awesome. Love it. Oh, and by the way, one last comment I'll say is, once you then if you use and include with this kind of output, you can actually include this image into a full output report, like a dissertation or a company report or project. It's kind of really fun to kind of include that stuff into your outputs. Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, just a great thing to follow on, because I was very excited. Someone mentioned doing some stuff out to R, and it targeted an itch I've had for a long time, because I realized that one of the things that you can do and it probably speaks more to those doing possibly technical work, but doing things like documentation or instruction. And obviously, I know that a lot of sort of educators in our community, is that potentially you can write one set of information and do things like, so you can knock out essentially a book in LaTeX, a print book. You can knock out an ebook. You can maybe have a website that actually visualizes some of the stuff you've got, and you can even do the equivalent of something you might have probably more. You're more likely to have made something like Jupyter Notebook, where you have documents where you can run a little bit of code. So essentially, you can have interactive diagrams inside your document, and that can be quite useful if you know, instead of trying to explain how a particular waveform works or a particular economic change works, you could have a diagram where you allow someone to sort of play with the control, and they actually see the thing change. As we live in probably a more visual time in the era of TikTok and all that sort of thing, I think that's pretty damn cool. I'm a long way from knowing how all those bits go together, but I'm beginning to see something I hadn't thought about is that you could start in Tinderbox at the exploratory end, get a grasp of what you want to do, push all that out into our code and into Markdown. So essentially, a lot of the magic that's being done in the workflow that was being talked about in R is actually Markdown, which again is very familiar to a number of people here. So it just remixes a number of things we probably know about. Of course, the doing of it is slightly more complicated than the description of it. But I think there's some wonderful things that might be done, especially for those who need to write either documentary or instruction materials. Thanks.
Yeah, and also, Mark, I think this emphasizes the stuff that was happening in GenThread too, is this idea that, and again, there's no pejorative when I say this, but one of the things I absolutely love about Tinderbox is there really are no hard edges, right? Your hard edge is your ability to actually figure out the code and make some of this stuff work. But you can take in your inputs, and you can manipulate and curate those inputs, and then you can get outputs. Whereas tools like Curio, or even Scrivener in some contexts, which are amazing, and they've got really, really great visuals, but they also have some really solid hard edges. Like, you do all of this work to make things pretty and to get things organized, and then you can't get it out. The way to get it out is like maybe take a screenshot or copy and paste, but it becomes very, very manual to then manipulate things to get them out. And maybe you could comment a little bit on your thoughts on that at the distinction you and I are having on Thursday on that role between like one-off projects and like automated reusability repurposing. I think that would be a good thing for you to review.
Sure. I thought there might be a follow-up question. Yeah, no. I think you make a really good point, because I think one of the challenges is, and I see this all time and again in the forum here and indeed in other communities, is that There is a sort of FOMO, fear of missing out. So somebody's done something really cool. I should be using this. Well, actually, no. If you don't need it, and I mean, this came up with the Curio. So the point is, if there is something else, another tool that does what you need to get you to where you need to go, that's good enough. You don't need to do a big automation tool. Now, if you're doing what a smaller number of people here are doing, is doing output where it's got to go into a particular format, they just don't control it. The person at the other end needs it in, Word 90 or something, and that's just not your choice. So you stick the thing, you pump it through Pandoc or whatever. And so it's very difficult in a time when most of the tools we use habituate us to answer, which button do I have to press? Which thing do I get to get the banana? Do I get the treat? And we are like lab rats in that sense, because that's actually how a lot of software treats us. It's not deliberate, but that's the effect. What we're taught to do is to do things in the right order to get the right reward. With tools for thought, which Tinderbox is an example, there are some others, but I mean in this rather niche area, it flips it on its head. What you really need to ask yourself is, what am I trying to do, or what gets me to where I'm trying to go? So if you're going to do the same thing, I'm writing reports, say for somebody else, it's not necessarily exactly the same subject matter every time, but I have the same process I need to do. I need something roughly similar looking at the end. Then the payoff of the sort of automation that Michael's done is massive. But if you're just doing something once in a blue moon and you know nothing about the automation, it's probably not worthwhile. And one shouldn't worry that other people are doing this and one is not, because who cares? There are other things to do in life. I think this is very difficult to put across, because we start with the expectation that if someone is appearing to get more than we are out of it, in that their output is more impressive than ours, that we're losing out. And I think that's a very wrong way to look at it. I mean, the over sort of 20 odd years now that I've used Tinderbox, I've realized that I've realized how hard it is to do some of the things I'm used to doing in other tools. And again, that's not a canard against those tools. It's the fact that if you're in the area where you want to do sort of free form mix of qualitative and quantitative analysis of text, Tinderbox is actually very good for it. But that isn't everybody's need. Sometimes you just got to write a report, or you just need to do an extraction and go somewhere. And I think it's a really hard thing. And I noticed because it's a sort of constant thing that comes up in the forums. So I got here because everything else was no use. Now tell me exactly how to use this open-ended tool. And you think, okay, here we're back at the same step again. And no one's done anything wrong, but it's difficult to step outside this perspective of the application tells you what to do, or what you're allowed to do. And more to the point, if you don't do it in the right way, you don't get a reward. Whereas Tinderbox, you can do what you like. You may never get a reward, but it doesn't know what reward you want. So how can it give you one? So you make your own reward. I'll stop at that.
And one thing I might add too is on this as well, is you often, especially when you're working in teams, as I do almost every day, you're often relegated to the lowest common denominator tool that the team is using, especially if it's your boss, or your client. So for example, I was having a meeting yesterday, and I was doing the whiz-bangy Tinderboxy thing, and I'm like, look at this, look at that, look at all the associations we have. And at the end of the day, it's like, dude, I just use PowerPoint. I can't, and when I make visual connections, I pull up a PowerPoint slide and I draw a box and I draw a line here and there. And inside I'm actually, it wasn't my inside voice. I was dying and cringing all along the way. And, but at the end of the day, he needed to be able to do what he needed to do. I needed to be able to do what I needed to do. So I needed to give him the material in a format that would work for him. And so let me give you one little quick demo on that, which was super useful. I can't show you the actual file, but I can do it in this example. So let's say we were working and trying to develop a series of tasks and priorities. And so I said, okay, look, I've gone through all this work to curate the links and make them make the associations, but clearly this tool is not going to work for you, and you need to be able to manipulate that yourself. And I needed to get it to him quickly. So what I did was I basically right mouse clicked on the note, and I opened it up in a new text window. I then converted that to view it as a table view. I went in and added the table columns that I wanted to show him. I was then able to then copy this, copy as tab separated values, open up a Excel spreadsheet, and just hit, come on, and just hit paste. Right? So I now have all of the values. I have all of the data that he needed to be able to do his manual thing in PowerPoint. And I was able to email it off to him. And that took maybe 3.5 minutes. And so again, that's another really kind of this ability to repurpose, reuse, reformat. In this case, I'm not using the typical Becker automatical monster templates. It's just an internal view that let me do something really fast. And that's again another great example of the tool that we are choosing to use and learn about. Okay, and sorry guys, we've any comments, thoughts, reactions to that thread, or do you want to move on and talk about something different?
I just want to randomly throw in a comment about software applications evangelism, because I'll find I have several friends whom I'll see them doing something, like typically as you were talking about this person who wanted to do everything in PowerPoint, and I'll be like, you could easily just learn how to use like X application and something basic like Excel. Oh, no, why do I need to learn something new? I don't want to have to learn another tool. I'm not sure whether it resonates with this group, but because most of us are always talking about, oh, I use 14 applications or I use 12, and this is exactly what I use what for. It's like having a kitchen with 14 knives and you know the purpose of each one of them. I'm actually fine with just 3 knives. So
yeah, exactly. Bring a bread knife to every fight, right? Okay. All right. Anybody else have anything? What other projects are people working on? New Year's resolutions, lists. What are you looking at into 2025? Mary Beth and I will be kicking off the 12th edition of our book next year. We'll be working on that, which will be good. Chuck, you're always good for a good comment. What are your reactions on the conversations we were just having?
I completely agree with all the points that were made. I'm in listening mode right now because I'm transitioning from a long period of working like a craftsman on my house and getting all these projects done. Now I'm going to start documenting the lessons learned from this about how do you fully electrify U.S. residents with and get off gas, which turns out to be a challenging problem and something that I think lots of people need to pay more attention to why it's important. So I'm hoping to make extensive use of Tinderbox as a tool to help pull together a lot of experience, a lot of thoughts, and present basically information to people to support individuals doing planning, policymakers writing policies or defining policies, vendors thinking differently about their products and how they fit into the household. So, that's a huge challenge. I think Tinderbox may become a very important tool to it. That's what I'm thinking about right now. And so that's my New Year's resolution, is to get going on that.
If I can be so bold to add something to your thinking too. So as we add all of this electrification and, or say IoT devices into these households, when you're telling vendors to think differently, can you also tell them that the data that's being generated by these IoT devices is actually not theirs, and it's the economic asset of the homeowner, and stay the
amen. Amen. Number one complaint I have.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some vendors that do a really good job. Most are taking the silo approach. We have our product. It does heating or cooling. Maybe it does both, but it's our product. It has this way of working, and we take all the data for our purposes.
Yeah.
Oh, you wanted it split out by day? Sorry, we only do it by month.
Well, and not only that, it's not your data. I bought the
Right.
device. I paid for a service.
I know.
My electricity produced the data. That data is my economic asset, not yours. Now, if you want to use it, pay me for it.
Yeah, no,
Right?
yeah,
And that
I
payment,
find that one of the
that
biggest
payment, that
annoyances.
payment might be give me the device for free.
Right.
But but don't make me pay for the right for you to be able to invade my privacy or to take away my economic opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing that's a major issue that I see going forward is the disconnect between what real people want to do with these new appliances effectively. And the number one appliance that everyone is going to really change the game is the EV charger, because it consumes so much electricity, and yet it's so essential. Basically, we are transitioning the vast amount of energy that was distributed as petroleum product and consumed via combustion, and we're converting that to electrical use. And the big appeal of EVs is I don't need to go to the gas station. I can charge at home. And so lots of people are trying to deploy EV chargers and running into lots of issues. But the challenge with all this is that the people who think about the appliances and what they're doing are not thinking through necessarily all the issues that a homeowner would have and what they have to address, and how is this going to work with their existing electrical supply, and how does information get used to handle that. So those are all the challenges that are out there, and we have people developing standards. We have the Matter and Thread stuff that Apple is very involved in, and yet I look at the Threads communication protocol and say, this is a lot of nonsense. It doesn't actually solve the problems that people have and creates new problems. So it's that kind of stuff that needs visibility, it needs some transparency, it needs people talking about it, it needs information being exchanged. And that's where I look at Tinderbox as being a terrific tool.
All right, so we have Dave, then Mary Beth, and then if no one pops in, I want Malcolm to chime in on his comments from the forum. So I think that's something we can play with today too. So Dave.
Well, I'm going to follow up on Chuck's comments. We have an electric home, but what we're doing now is in the process of evacuating it. We are moving from Florida to upstate New York, where we'll probably build another home. And I've lived here in Florida now for over 30 years. Originally grew up in central New York, and now we're going to the Finger Lakes. But we don't know anything there really. We need to identify new healthcare providers, new dentists. We need to understand what all the numbers are for the services, the utilities. Some of that we're slowly accreting, but I'm creating a Tinderbox document that will kind of collate that stuff for us so that it can serve as a reference. I'll have to export it for my wife, but there's just so many different dimensions of moving a household, and we will be constructing another home on this property. We've got a little 1-bedroom, 960 square feet place that we probably cannot age into. So we'll be building something that we can age into and documenting that whole process. We've learned a lot just before we moved in. We've been in this house for 5 years. Before we moved into here, we lived in a condominium that I renovated and gutted. So we learned a lot of lessons there. Moved into this place, which was built as a spec home by the developer. We had some input into its design, but not very much. Learned a lot of lessons there. Got to try and capture those in Tinderbox to bring them to the next design, which will either be with a design build contractor or an architect or something like that. But a tool like Tinderbox gives you the means to assemble a lot of disparate pieces of information, make the associated links, and help facilitate this transition that we swore we were never going to do. They were going to carry us out feet first from this house. But having watched Helene and Milton, I've come to the conclusion that I do not wish to be in my 70s dragging all my crap to the curb someday and starting over. So we're leaving Florida, but Tinderbox will be a part of that.
Nice. Mary Beth.
Well, hi there. Yeah, I'm in Southern California, and I don't know too many of you, but I've enjoyed this this group a lot when I'm able to be here. A couple of things I'm planning for 2025 is I'm planning another trip around the world. I'm kind of curious how Tinderbox is being used in other countries besides the ones that we know about. And as Michael said earlier, we have a book launch. We've already written it, so it's coming out February 5th. And we do have some seats available if anybody here is interested in kind of checking the book out, so we can send some of the content to you, or at least an access to that if we, if you're interested. Our publisher has made that available. And also, I'm kind of curious to the group here, is there an intersection of Tinderbox and mobile? Since the book is about mobile marketing essentials, thanks for asking, Peter. That's the title in the 12th edition. So we started working on this 2012, 2013, 2014 is when we got our legs under us. So we've done at least one or sometimes two upgrades per year. So I'm wondering if there is any plan or future for how is mobile going to interact with Tinderbox, because I'm on my mobile phone at least 90% of the time. And I'm also on the iPad and other mobile devices. So just kind of throwing that out to the group and to the developers. And I just want to say thanks for making me feel welcome and invited. And thanks, Michael, for all the things you're doing. He's been trying to teach me this since about 6 years now. So we're making it little progress at a time. Thanks.
So let me respond to your the mobile question. Tinderbox itself is a really hard. I don't know the developers here, but I'll talk for it. Really reliant on the whole Mac OS environment and sitting on a Mac computer. They're really porting this to mobile, given that we only have a single developer working on this for us. It would be a Herculean effort and very distracting. Probably not something we want from the community. Having said that, though, as we've talked about in today's conversation, there are so many apps that are mobile that intimately interface with Tinderbox really well. Like, for instance, Art and I have been using, and maybe Art, you can comment on the use of Obsidian, drafts. I mean, it depends on what you want. But and I love Paul Christie's comment from my class that I taught just a few weeks ago. He's like, Tinderbox is the place where work gets done. So if you're out and about and mobile, you're probably more likely your use case there is collecting insights, collecting notes. You're in that collection stage, not necessarily the getting work curation stage. At which point apps like drafts, and even on your Apple Watch, hey, drafts, blah, blah, blah. And then that automatically gets pushed into a Tinderbox file. So there's a lot of that could happen. And so when you go on your next trip, maybe we prepare you for that mobile collection elements and then show you how that can be connecting to your thinking environment when you're sitting down in your laptop to actually do the work to pull all these pieces together.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I actually don't even bring a laptop. So 2023, I traveled all the way around the world, every time zone, 90 days without a laptop. So that's, I just had a small personal item and I was on 18 different airlines. So I'm going to have a similar trip coming up this summer.
And let me just comment on that. So in order to make it more Tinderbox-likey in that for experience for you, in my opinion, and others please chime in, but Obsidian is absolutely the best tool for that, because you can use properties, you can match those properties, you can enable linking, it works great on the phones. And then 90 days later, you can do writing, and you can write full prose and articles in Obsidian environment. And then when you get back from your trip, you can use and Art was the one that drove this a few weeks back or months back. We did an Obsidian to Tinderbox stream parsing script that we wrote. So then you can simply have Tinderbox do a watch folder on your Obsidian vault, apply a stamp to that vault, and everything then automatically gets populated into Tinderbox attributes. Then you use some of my code to have Tinderbox automatically then link and create notes and build all that whole knowledge graph out for you. And that would be a perfect example of how an app like Obsidian out in the field and an app like Tinderbox back in the lab, right? That's my thinking. Art, you want to chime in on that? And then we'll let Peter go.
Oh yeah. And probably going to say very much along the same lines of what you were going to say. Only one thing I would add is, initially I took this as a restriction, not being able to access my Tinderbox databases when I was on the go. And then over a period of time, I sort of learned to turn it into a feature, not a bug, because since I have such a plethora of information and knowledge coming in, I sort of use now my mobile environment as a filter, and Obsidian is classically useful for that, simply because it's structurally the most similar program I can think of to Tinderbox, in the sense that I have the ability to hyperlink, I have the ability to or backlink. I have my folder structure stays sort of constant, and my Obsidian individual files are easily grabbed by using watch folders. And then, of course, there's drafts, which is another very practical for an on-the-go kind of thinking thing, which ultimately you can use an Apple script. I think Detlef was the one who provided a really great Apple script that allowed you to push your drafts content into Tinderbox. So it works ultimately. And I travel a heck of a lot. I do at least 6 to 7 trips back and forth to either India or China a year. And I'm constantly on the go. And I think I had a period of about a month or 2 months last year that I didn't have my laptop on me, and worked just fine. And of course, I use pen and paper. So there's that.
Awesome. Peter.
Okay, looking forward to the new year. I have been for years now in hoovering up gazillion bits of information mode, and I want to sort of flip the switch and throw the direction and start converting all of that morass of accumulated research into a book or two in the new year. So that's where I'm looking for the new year. I have a really hyper technical question. Is there any way we can get Tinderbox to be aware of environmental variables for my preferred shell when I'm using run command? Because it seems that it's not finding things that I have set on my path, and it's okay if I give a precise path location to a binary that I want it to run, but it's not finding anything and looking out. So even when, and the reason this popped up was I'm still following the attempt to drive homebrew from inside of Tinderbox. And one of the things I did, I made a stamp to run Brew Doctor. And Brew Doctor is a command inside of Homebrew that analyzes your system, sees whether you have anything in the wrong place or whether there are conflicting programs that were installed by other installation systems, to spot potential issues that could cause Homebrew installs to fail. Now, if I run Brew Doctor from my preferred shell, it's not finding problems. But if I invoke Brew Doctor from inside of Tinderbox, it's coming up with additional issues saying that it's not finding paths to some of Brew's directories on my path, even though they are on my path from the perspective of my shell outside of Tinderbox. So it seems like there should be some way to give Tinderbox some extra information. I don't know how, maybe there's some terminal command that can tell Tinderbox that when Tinderbox launches, it should be aware of some extra path locations that aren't part of its baked-in defaults. But I'm not sure, has anyone had that issue before, and have you dealt with it?
Peter, drop me an email with the particulars of your preferred shell and stuff like that. I recall, and I haven't looked at this in years. When we launch a shell, we have hardwired something that's very naive and just works. But actually, that's probably the wrong way to go about it. And we can probably get this fixed with the parameters somehow or other.
Okay, I'll send you an email offline then. And in other news, I'm having good headway with that script. Now I'm able to pull in all of the listings. I'm following Mark's suggestion and going through each line of the note content instead of using Explode, and I'm directly creating the notes, which is working very nicely. I'm going to set it up so that I can also do a search direct inside of Tinderbox of available packages. Then if I drag one of the names of an available package into another note, it will then go off and tell Brew to install that package. So all that's going well. It'll be maybe another week before I can share it with the group. But we're making really good headway on it. So Tinderbox will become, with Brewmeister, which is the name of the script that I'm writing there, a front end for the homebrew system.
Fun. Look forward to it. Okay, Chuck, then let's ask Steve, because Steve just posted something in the forum I think we want to talk about. Go for it, Chuck.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on the discussion that Mary Beth started about working mobile, and just throw out a query to the group and see if there's any uptake on this. But I found that my leaning is on my iPad or my iPhone to try and leverage the tools that Apple already provides. And the notes tool is adequate for me anyway, for taking notes on the fly. What I'm trying to look into is how feasible is it to automate getting those notes brought into Tinderbox. And I'm wondering if anybody has actually tackled that, and if there's any there are any examples out there for how to go about doing it. And the other application that I'm not using, but my wife has been using, that is kind of intriguing as well, is Freeform. And there are times when I've sort of thought, well, gee, wouldn't it be nice if I could exchange Freeform with my wife as a way of getting information both out of Tinderbox, but also into Tinderbox. So along the lines of Tinderbox can't be everything, Tinderbox can be a good master tool to work with other tools. I just thought maybe it would be interesting to see if anybody else has just been trying to stay within the Apple ecosystem and leverage tools there.
2 comments. Paul Christie, do you think your Apple shortcuts could do something there? And then on Freeform, Chuck, you want to reach out to Tom Diaz. He does that.
Yeah.
With Freeform.
Shortcuts is a great tool. Every app has different support for it, and I have found that some of the Apple apps, particularly Freeform, don't support shortcuts well enough for you to do some work. So you got to kind of go on a case-by-case basis and open up shortcuts, point to the app, and then see what kind of support they give to it.
Notes is pretty well supported in shortcuts, but what I found on an iPhone 13 is it's pretty slow when you're running an automation. So it became not very practical in terms of doing what I wanted to do with it. And Tinderbox will ingest whatever notes you create in a watched folder in Notes, and then you can act on that once it arrives in Tinderbox with action code and file it or do whatever you want with it.
Mr. Anderson.
I just draw the sort of circle around that. If I understand correctly, I think shortcuts is Apple's nth attempt to kill off AppleScript. So we had services and we had Automator, but it's not iOS enough. So that upset the cool kids. So I think we have shortcuts now. So you may find some of the things you want in shortcuts. You may not. You may well find that what you need is in AppleScript. Now, the parts of this depends, what's trying to talk to what. But don't overlook that actually not you that it may be that using the newest shiniest thing, which of course gets the kids in marketing really excited, isn't necessarily the thing that may get you to where you want to go. That said, the flip side is that it's like AppleScript has been on the naughty step for I don't know how many decades, but it hasn't gone away yet. But it does work. Its syntax is somewhat gnomic, and if you find yourself using AppleScript, you may want to actually pony up for a license for the wonderful AppleScript debugger, which is just sort of, that tool exists so no one else has to. And every time I open it up, I'm reminded of why it's actually really good. It actually lets you see what's sort of going on and get an idea of the possibilities of what's there. But it goes back to this thing: if that's your need, and you want to make these things talk to one another. I'll just throw in one more thing, so I see that hands up. It's on a slightly different tangent, which is just, I'm very conscious that something, and this is perhaps more for the people who aren't in the room and watching this recording later, is that it is the case that for probably the majority of us, doing something without the handhold of an app/UI is just downright scary. So, there is a tendency, the more one learns about these things, well, you just get one of these and you lash it up to that, and it does work. And I think, something that I have sort of taken on board is a responsibility to sort of try and help people understand that it's not as scary as it sounds. You got all this power built into a Mac. It's all there for you to use. And probably once things are working, they generally stay working with the sort of connections we're doing. So the fact that it all looks really alien and it doesn't come all in a nice sexy UI and just a button to click shouldn't be a scary thing. The reason the app that you want isn't there is because it's probably not worth somebody to build it. There isn't a market. We're doing very different things. We're doing similar things, but differently all the time. And this is the secret. And I think once you internalize that, it becomes easier to sort of feel more relaxed about the fact that, oh, when somebody said you should do this, they probably really meant it genuinely. They weren't trolling you. They're actually saying, no, the way to solve your problem is to lash these bits together. And, my experience is that when you do that, the kindness of strangers is bottomless. So you go out there, and if you ask politely, there will be someone who knows and will help you put the bits together. So thank you.
Awesome. Bruce, and then Art.
Hi, everyone. If my appearance frightens you in any way, then I'll take myself back off camera. I think most of you know I'm recuperating from incredibly successful hip replacement surgery, and I figured out a way. Yeah, so I am actually at an angle right now where my feet are higher than the rest of my body using a massage recliner, and I've got the laptop set up. So anyway, apropos of nothing, but that's why the strange position. I think it was Dave. I think you were commenting about moving things from either drafts or notes into in the Tinderbox. Did I follow that right?
Yeah,
And
I've
someone
used
else.
notes to move things into Tinderbox.
So I guess what I'm wondering, I'm looking for, I use drafts. I I like notes. I happen to like the font, but and they've made some improvements. I am certainly willing to learn Obsidian. Kind of interesting. I don't think it's relevant. I don't hear anybody mentioning it, but David Sparky is absolutely in love with Notion and talks about Notion all the time. So I guess what I'm wondering is, you all know a little bit about my skill set. Which piece of software would you suggest, moving forward? It's all in drafts right now. There's a 1,000 notes that need to be moved, but moving forward is Michael, is your comment, is it Obsidian? Which one am I going for?
Let others respond to that. You know my answer.
Well, yes.
For now, I might find another shiny toy eventually, but for now, I've found my answer at least.
The thing I like about drafts is that it just works, no matter what I pick up and need to put it in, and when I need to find something, it happens quickly and efficiently, which is ideal. And I know that it has action code that'll let me go to Tinderbox. I've not played around with watch folders. I'm getting closer on that. But is draft sufficient if I've been finding it useful?
Again, drafts is fine. One of the reasons why I like Obsidian is all of the files are sitting on the hard drive independently as raw plain text. So, they're all accessible via a watch folder. Each individual note in Obsidian is actually an individual file sitting on your hard drive, which then can be written in Markdown or other forms of text. And then it also has properties and it maps back to Tinderbox. So there's a lot of elements there that really fit well within the Tinderbox ecosystem.
Any other thought?
Mute.
Yeah, I would just add to Bruce's question first and then kind of go back to why I raised my hand. So yeah, I would definitely go with Obsidian for now. I'm not like into the Notion and Rome environment. So, there are some issues and it's slightly different. The way that the app works is different. I like having a local copy of my data, that it's fully owned. I like the fact that the sort of overall file structure paradigm works very well with Tinderbox. So when I'm exporting, say, 4 or 5 or 10 individual notes that will ultimately become that many individual notes or more in Tinderbox, it's a sort of parallel process. I wouldn't say it's a drafts or Obsidian issue. For me, it's more like they work in conjunction. If I have an individual little tidbit of data or something like that, that I just need to make sure that's only briefly there and then ultimately ends up wherever. That's what I'd use drafts for. You can use drafts in conjunction with Mail and so many other apps. So I don't really see that. If anything, it would be like maybe drafts and then Obsidian and then Tinderbox, or something directly to Obsidian or Tinderbox and then or something directly into Tinderbox, if all that makes sense.
It does.
And draft is not very Obsidian is not very difficult to learn. It's a very text-based app. Again, the paradigms to Tinderbox are very clear and very simple. And once you get the hang of a few things, then you can sort of make it complicated as you go. I would go that route particularly. And to move on to why I raised my hand, I just wanted to understand, Chuck, a little more clearly what it is that you were speaking about in terms of the ecosystem and using freeform, etc., with Tinderbox. Like, what is the specific pinch point?
Well, I mean, I guess just that, I spend my life dealing with configuring and updating and managing software in very complex systems. And I've kind of gotten into the attitude that I'd like my phone and my iPad to be just there and not get into trying to install lots of additional apps and maintaining those apps on those devices, because I want them to be very straightforward, pain-free. And that's why I have an inclination to prefer what's already built in, what the vendor is already providing, and providing adequate integration with cloud services and synchronization across the platform and so forth. So that's the inclination I have for trying to use Notes or Freeform or the other apps that are built in. Just as I do there, I don't use Apple's Mail application for mail on my Mac desktop. I use Thunderbird. It's got a lot more power and capability. When I'm on the road, Mail is fine for quickly checking some mail and things like that. I use BusyCal, but on the road, I just use Apple's calendar tool. Fine, it does what I needed to do. Reminds me about appointments and gets me in my Zoom calls, things like that. So I was just trying to, my thought has been, I have just not had the time to dig into it, but my thought has been, what can I do with the stuff that's already baked into the mobile environment to reduce the friction to get that into an environment where I can actually work with it, so that when I'm on the road and I jot down a bunch of notes, that I can minimize the effort to get it into a more viable platform like Tinderbox to work with it. And I'm particularly interested in, how do I go from the note that has a bunch of bullet points or indents and get that exploded into Tinderbox as perhaps separate notes for each bullet. That's an obvious thing to do. I'm sure I can do it, but I was just looking to see if other people had learned that there are problems with that, or that watch folders get you so far, but what do you do with when you import the data, and how do you manipulate it, and are there problems going the other way? Suppose I want to produce a note that I then have available on my mobile devices.
Right.
I draw an example of that. I'm an avid DevonThink user. DevonThink has a mobile app. I'm sad to say I've never really made much use of it because it doesn't integrate with anything else in the mobile environment to the extent that I would like it to. Maybe that's just my failing. I've never spent the time to dig into it. So I was just throwing out an interest in what the problems are and what challenges might be out there. And if anybody else had found that something like integrating notes with Tinderbox works well or doesn't work well. That's all.
Right. Well, these are really super important things to me, because I think over the last 4 or 5 years, I've gone through multiple runs at how to get data into Tinderbox. But the sort of the outlying basis being that a lot of this material comes in via text or links. And so if it's something that's graphics or something like for example, freeform, I might have a different issue altogether, or might try to export, screenshots or something for reference. But sort of the Finder in conjunction with the way I can use watch folders generally does. And I'm assuming now that you're speaking about basically getting things from the Apple ecosphere into and out of Tinderbox, essentially. Would that be right? So yeah, and so that I think the best route that I've come to see, Apple Notes for me, many years in the middle didn't really work so well, and there were certain periods of time where Apple Notes was lagging, or sometimes something would be broken in getting it across. And Tot I found useful, but it seemed a little odd because the mobile app and the desktop app seemed not to be entirely like being developed synchronously. At some point, I just had some issue with that, and then I bumped it. And since then, I've been on drafts, and again, I will reiterate the use of Obsidian because it has a perfectly compatible mobile versus desktop environment. Anyone can use it. You can share a vault. So there's a lot of open opportunity for collaboration even in there, and being text and markdown based, it's a lot easier. Plus, as Michael indicated, you can import whatever you set up in terms of attributes. It can be done using properties outside of, even before you go into Tinderbox. And if there's that, for example, a document that you want to share with your partner, it can literally appear in Obsidian the way you ultimately will have it appear in Tinderbox. And it's not that difficult to then export to update, all our Christmas cards list or certain important information for our safe deposit box. It's relatively easy to sort of maintain a parallel version between these two apps because the paradigm is similar.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, I'm just going to come back at this plain text thing from another angle, because it's been in mind in another forum I'm in, which is sort of to do with sort of text and where it's all going. Having an interesting sort of long-term disagreement with someone who at heart is an artist and a graphic designer, who gets very, very upset when you try and suggest that text without any styling is of any use in any way, shape, or form. Because I keep saying to him, when you get something, put in plain text before you style it and do all this stuff with it, because every artifact you add, you've got to take out. And so whether one uses Obsidian or something else, I think what the real heavy lift that plain text can offer you is what it doesn't bring with it. I think the thing that we overlook, and is brought back to mind by some of the tools that Mark's added in of late into the action code set, in terms of things like being able to do stream parsing, is the sense that if you value plain text as an interchange format, and you think about marking, basically, metadata is no use after the fact. So mark stuff up beforehand. It might look a bit ugly. This is the problem. Normally, this is the app culture. An app does that. This text appears in this box, and it magically works out how the text appeared in that box and not another box. Now, if you just work at the level of text, to a degree, you need to do a bit of that signaling. But if you know why you're doing it, so I'm working at this end of my sort of ecosystem, but I want it over there, and I want it over there without nasty, horrible things being done with it. Actually, a very small amount of sort of markup of the loosest kind, literally just a label at the beginning of a paragraph or something, will get you an awful long way, because you don't need sophisticated tools to recover it. And most of the time, you don't actually need to look at the text in the interstitial format. You're putting it in here and you want it there. And does it really matter if it looks a bit ugly along the way? I think that offends our sort of sense of tidiness and things, because when we see it in that intermediate form, we think, oh, that's not right. It should be nicer. But actually, it's enlightened self-interest. So, other things come and go, but actually, sort of keeping things in plain text and keeping it basically structured is remarkably powerful, and it's something I've definitely come back to, because I say come back to because it just seems counterintuitive, but I think once you grok what it can offer, then I think one gets more relaxed about worrying in a sense how it looks, and what you begin to think about is how can I get it from here to there, through whatever pipeline or set of different tools I'm using, and it turns up in the right place where I actually want it, where I do care about it being text in all its other forms, and yeah. So and the moral is, if you like that text enough, put some metadata on it. Chuck.
Before you move on that, I want to make a comment too. And if you take care of the syntax when you're writing that text, so for example, the Obsidian YAML file, right? If you do it and you think about the sentence, like we were showing also with earlier in today's call too, feed a visual tool like Vis.js for a timeline utility and the right syntax of text, and it will produce a really pretty output for you. So if you can kind of consider that, you realize that, or like the Mermaid example, right? You realize that plain text can produce incredibly visually appealing output and perform other functions. So, another example is in my Obsidian files, I'll put in terms, and then when I import those into Tinderbox will then automatically go create term notes for me, link those notes for me, because I know the syntax and how the code's going to work. And I know that text will then tell Tinderbox to go do something. So it's really powerful when to your point, when you finally kind of figure that out, it really opens up a whole bunch of exciting things. Yeah, Chuck.
So I'm going to take a contrarian point of view and say that if I'm writing and I'm trying to communicate to other people, then often a very important part of the writing is a bit of the styling. Bullet points in as you're going along, as you are thinking through what you're trying to say to someone. If you want to put a series of bullet points, if you want to put in a little table, if you want to italicize text for emphasis, or bold it, or change the colors, those things wind up being very important parts of what you're creating when you are communicating to someone else, or even communicating to yourself. So, I think I completely understand the point about the power of just simple, plain text. I've lived much of my professional career inside of things that only understand plain text. But if I want to communicate, I do think that communications is more than just plain text. And stylizing it is important to the writing part of the process. And so I think that we got to be a little bit careful that we don't skew this discussion too far the other way.
Well, but Chuck, let me react to that. And this is why I so like Markdown, is I don't disagree with you. And, and if you think about like, well, what is some of that formatting, or even like HTML for that matter? bold tags are a way of doing stylizing. Double asterisks are a way of doing bolding in plain text. And so you can write plain text with style in mind, such that when you then bring it into some other app, that other app then can convert that to its way of rendering that. But my problem has been, like, when I'm in Microsoft Word, for instance, and I'm writing bold, I'm sticking structure into my content. And then what if I want to unbold that later? Or if I want to make it easy to transform and do something differently? In the Word environment, it becomes yet another manual exercise. Whereas if it's written in plain text, whether or not it be HTML tags or Markdown tags, I can use tools like Tinderbox or Obsidian to transform that stylizing so much faster and easier.
I get it, but at the same time, I guess I would just observe that there's a difference between just putting the thoughts down and Command B for bold, Command B to unbold. I don't want a lot of friction between me and what I'm trying to create in the writing it down process. And look, I started out, the first time I ever produced a computer generated document was something that was equivalent of runoff back in 1970. And so, the whole concept of, using some kind of schema for telling a computer how you want text styled or formatted or things like that, it's there. I mean, it's baked into my whole professional career, but it's an interference. If I have to write and think about the formatting as a separate thing that doesn't look like what I want, then I think that is an impediment to the type of writing I would like to do. But that's just me. Lots of other people have different perspectives. The problem I have with and unfortunately I have a whole career of watching people go through this. The problem I have with the plain text argument is its least common denominator. We have all these crazy ways of doing things, but if you just break it back down to text, it's the least common denominator. Well, that's got its problems. And so I guess we need both in the world, but I'd hate to see us go to a world that says everything has to be plain text because that's the only thing that our computers and people can treat as something we can work with because it's the least common denominator. That's my concern.
Yeah. Nice. Okay, Art, and then Mark.
Yeah, so on the topic of plain text, and let's assume that, I mean, I feel like we need to break this down into two threads. One is, can whatever content or whatever thing you're processing and working on and thinking about it, can it be boiled down into plain text or not? And for those who are perhaps living in a visual medium world, then can they extract a version of that, for example, a link to a file or an image or URL that is not natively itself in text? And I think the second thread about formulating and then expressing ideas, to me, handwriting with a pen is probably the most effective way to put my thoughts down in a communicable manner on paper without the friction of having to worry about the technology. I don't even have to think about Command B. I just have to go back and then rewrite that letter, overwrite it just to make sure that it's bolded. And there's also a way for me to then take that completed thought and digitize it. And I don't think it can catch bold and italics just yet, but that's probably just a matter of a few years in technology development. So we are getting to that point. Also, like say I'm working on a document that's perhaps too large for me to get started with on paper, because I know already in my head it's going to have 7-8 sections and I'm going to have to go back and edit and things like that. And if I choose, I can use whichever app that I want. I think for me now, then the important part becomes about exactly how am I going to store that document and How am I going to need to access it in future, or is there a need to archive it? And based on those various considerations, I might pick one or another method. Bruce has, I think it was Dave that just brought up you could export it as a PDF, and that way you have that document, you can drag it into Tinderbox, so the archival function is covered. Someone like Peter might, I think I remember him saying that he uses marked 2 on the side, so he can type something into Markdown, and it does the job of him being able to work within Markdown, but there's sort of a preview screen alongside that shows him exactly what the finished product is going to look like. So it is possible. It's just it can be a pain in the butt going from one to the other. Right? This is my feeling on it.
Grant Anderson.
And at the risk of causing disappointment, I'm not going to disagree with Chuck. I totally take the point being made, and perhaps I was generalizing too much. And especially if communicating to others, the additional sort of styling really helps. What that really says to me is, and reflecting on that, is that it's learning to understand which thing is sort of going through which pathway. It's enlightened self-interest in a way, because what you want to be able to move around and do things on. One of the things I have really come to understand recently with doing some work, especially the stuff we're doing with trying to put text in XR and things, is that keeping the text of something separate from effectively typographic markup, the sort of the rich style text that we need, not so much Markdown, but something that you do unto your text that often, unfortunately, you can't easily remove, is a choice to be taken with due consideration. The classic thing is, the peer review is a nightmare. Every day somebody says, I just took this data, and I said, there's nothing in this about how you clean the data, because everyone just assumes it's not full of cruft that's come along with the ride. And so there is something to consider in that. So there is no one size fits all. And I apologize if I sort of appeared to give that view in relation to plain text. I think what I've learned, though, is that it's a low level common denominator that actually does much more heavy lift than we think. The nuanced choice is, at what point do you want to step up from that level and either record something with more stylistic hinting or info in it, because you're doing it for a particular reason, and reflecting on the fact that if I had to step back from that and go around the loop again, how hard would it be able to do? So the issue is not against text and such. I sit surrounded by books, which give me great pleasure with all their typographic wonder. But I've become very conscious about the difficulty of stepping in and out of that loop. And which is sort of why I just raise a small flag for the legacy world of plain text. But as I say, I don't disagree with Chuck at all. Thanks.
Although now that we are on to plain text, Steve Hart just posted in the forum an interesting plain text Tinderbox question about this very issue of wanting to stylize something. So Steve, you mind sharing with us what you're trying to solve?
Okay. Happy to. The use case, and a lot of the discussion so far has been a variety of different use cases, but I'm focused on one specific use case, and that is taking rapid notes. And my style is, I just create a new note, title the note, create a new note, title the note, based on my note taking. And I offered in the off the wall area that it might be helpful if I'm typing and I hear something, a word, a phrase that I want to call out, I want it to be emphasized, it would be very helpful to have a very select small set of markdown codes. So if I press the asterisk twice, type a word, press the asterisk twice, after I exit, it would display in bold. I also offered that maybe italic might be useful and angle brackets for links. So if somebody mentions a link, I could just start it with an angle bracket, type the URL, end it with an angle bracket. And when it renders, it would be a link that I could then click on and go to it. It's
So-
really a note-taking efficiency request. I don't know what the level of effort would be to try to implement this.
So let me pause though. I think I understand, and if you don't mind, let me pull it just so we can visualize it. Let me open up a Tinderbox file, and I think I get it. But we may want a two-step process is what I'm thinking to get there. But basically, you're saying, you've got a note, and you're typing, and you say, I want to bold this. Bold. Sorry, I can't type bold. This and link this. So you're saying as you're typing, you want to basically, and you want to be able to do it in the note name. So you have it like this. Okay.
Yeah, angled brackets, not the square brackets, but that's the idea.
What's an angle bracket, like that? Or-
Greater than, less than.
Yeah. So that.
Yep.
So you'd like to do that. Now, the question I have for you is, what are you asking the developer to be able to do? Do you want the developer to be able to say when they're, oh no, I think I accidentally bolded this. Interesting. When you're looking at the note name, do you want this to be showing up visually as bold and that be showing up as a clickable link? Or do you want something
Correct.
else?
No, I use outline mostly, so might be visually more impactful because you've got all kinds of note names, and some text in my vision of this would be bolded, which would be to get my attention for that particular word or phrase or that particular link. It would show up. So yeah, you type it in with the codes, and when you exit, then the system would store it just as it is, but it would display it in bold or
So
italic.
that would be, I would believe that would be a new feature request.
That's why it's called off the wall.
Right, because that's, you're asking kind of Tinderbox to now have its outline view be kind of a browser almost in terms of making clickable links and rendering style. Mr. Anderson, you thought or comment on that?
Well, I misread it slightly because I was thinking, well, don't we have that already with the Markdown support that's in Tinderbox? But that doesn't apply necessarily to the title.
Right.
I think the title. I think the title does get slightly problematic. As one other factor is historically the use of italics has been reserved for indicating aliases. But if you don't use aliases, why do you care? So, but it, then again, we're a big caucus. But it's something to bear in mind. It's an interesting thing because all of these things in the microcosm of the use case make eminent sense. The question is how it lives alongside everything else. Plus the fact that as someone who sort of happily sits in sort of 10,000 note Tinderboxes quite a lot of the time in outline, the more work you're doing styling the title and the affordances, maybe such as a clickable link into it, the more load you're putting in. Now, I'm very fortunate to be sitting on an M4 Mac at the moment, but nonetheless, that it does, I think, give pause for thought of. I understand the sort of the desire. The question is how best to put that into place. We've got very used to. I mean, so a thing du jour at the moment is the sort of semi-rendered thing. So you think about all of these things like Discord and Slack and something where, or certainly in Discord, if you go in there, you type something, you type it effectively in Markdown well, hopefully you get the right flavor of Markdown or all the wrong things happen. But let's just assume you're using the right Markdown, you type the magic code around something and it's rendered with the code. So it's this kind of weird semi-rendered approach. And that I can see is quite seductive because it seems easy. But but then you're sort of you're locked out from other things. So I mean I don't know if there's an easy answer. It would occur to me it might need to be a mode of use, because you just don't want it interfering with other things. But there's someone sitting in the box below on my screen anyway, who might know a thing or two about this. But I see Art has his hand up first.
Oh, now I'm sort of a little confused on that. But let me ask a question. Is there any way in Tinderbox to set a particular note so that every time I visit it, it will only display to me in preview mode and not text? Okay. Because I'm having this problem when I delve into preview mode. Most of my input can only be done in text view, in the text pane view. But when I want to go back between what I've just input and then take a look at the entire document, it requires an extra key press. I have to go to the master container or note and flick over to preview to see what it's going to look like.
Sure. I mean,
No, going back,
Tinderbox will stay in the mode that you just used. So if you in preview, it will stay in preview, it will stay in text mode, except if you say, if you're in preview mode and you select, say, a template, it will drop back into text mode, because previewing a template doesn't make sense really. But I take your point, and there is, of course, and although I note your point about an extra keystroke, and I'm spacing on it at the moment, there is a shortcut that allows you to cycle through the tabs on the text pane.
But going back to what we were talking about earlier, there is the marked app, and you could actually stream your text to the marked. So you could actually have marked sitting side by the side.
Well, yeah, I could probably do that. Yeah, but
so every time you click on a note, it's getting rendered and marked, and so you got best of both worlds. You can be typing and visualizing it at the same time.
Okay. Now, so just so I know for sure, and Peter's here so he could verify. So if you have marked running side by side, it can always be trained to look at whatever note that you want to look at, right? So that's your master. Okay, perfect. So thank you. So my own suggestion I can apply to myself. Great. I was going to ask Steve whether he has looked into the app called Bike, which has a very interesting way of doing rich text, but it works within a markdown format, from how I understand it. So
I have not. I just sort of wanted to center my world on Tinderbox for my note taking.
Hmm.
And now this does bring something else, Steve, that would be interesting. Yeah, I get, and for you, what's the benefit of highlighting a specific word or that specific link? I mean, it seems like you're trying to do a lot in a note title.
Well, I'm taking notes, and a specific phrase, if you want to display my particular off the wall item, it gives sort of an example. You hear a specific phrase, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna press the asterisk twice, type the phrase, press the asterisk twice, because I know later on when I'm reviewing my notes, I'm going to want to get back there.
I was thinking about that. So I have an idea for you.
Okay.
That might be if you get, but it might, let's let Chuck respond while I'm setting this up, but I think I've got an idea for you.
Once you have many in outline view, many lines, it's helpful to be able to visually have some of these emphases.
So let's think about, like, here's a phrase. So you're in your meeting and you're typing, you're like, here's a phrase. God, I can't type. Right. So you've done that, right? So you're rapidly going through in your outline mode, and you've done that. So what you could do, and what I'm understanding, it's not that you necessarily need this word phrase to be, and let's say maybe do it this way. And again, yeah. So let's say you do it this way, and it's not that you necessarily need this word phrase to be specifically bolded. What you're trying to do is highlight the concept that you're writing in this particular note at that moment.
I want the word phrase, to be bolded, so that when I see many of these things listed down in my outline view, my eye is goes to those items, and maybe I want to write additional notes around it. It's something like, you hear something and I want to translate that into something. I mean, I could use my own sort of special codes, and then search for it and so on. But I'm trying to reduce that amount of extra work, and I think you'll just have muscle memory when you hear something that you want to capture, a phrase especially. You just like hit the asterisk key and then hit the asterisk key.
Yeah,
It's more about quick capture.
But perhaps one strategy would be, and again, you can write action code on this, but maybe you said, if you had, and we can do it on the fly right quick, but let's just see if this would work with you. If you had that bold item, those two asterisks in the name, you have Tinderbox do this, right? And so now, that note automatically gets recognized as having like a green something. So at least you know that there's something in that note that's important to you. Right, so you can use flags. You could also use badges. But
it's that's sort of the 50% solution or something, because then I still have to read the note, which might be 5 words, but it might be 50 words, and I want visually to be able to, at the time, sort of market this particular phrase, and then when I'm coming back, I can very quickly find that phrase, like if it's bold or some other emphasis. So yeah, I could do that. It would mark all of those notes that I need to review, but that's not. There's sort of additional cognitive functioning in order to be able to then scan that particular note title and find the phrase, which I don't know. I'm just trying to reduce that friction. Other people have their hand up, so
let me give you one other idea while we're playing with it. Yeah, I mean, one other idea would be too is, let's say we view. So if you had it, so you're writing your notes, and let's say at some point you have Tinderbox. Or I gotta add the pane. At some point you have Tinderbox actually put that formatted text actually into the text, not the notes. And so then that way, when you're doing your scan, you could select all of these, and then and view it in. Yeah, we'd have to play with it, but maybe that's a way to do it. I don't know. We'll have to think that through.
Yeah, that's closer, because then we're essentially rendering all of the notes in the preview pane, and
yeah, and so in that context, the template. Oh, here's if that's the case, and you don't mind doing that, the other way to do that would be to use a template and have the template change the title of the note when it renders, and so those numbers are bold.
Yeah,
and so
I would estimate that's sort of a 70% solution. I want what I want, and if it's not possible, that's fine.
I know, but until you can get what you want, if it is possible, you don't have it today. And
Right.
So one thing you could do is you could build a template that said, if a word has 2 asterisks around it, generate the HTML for that title, so that word is in fact bolded, so that when you then render that, it renders as bold in the preview.
Yeah, I get it. Maybe others don't have this need, so that's what I'd like to hear some other folks on the call, to not have just a dialogue between the two of us.
Yeah, Chuck.
Well, I was going to offer an example of the kind of writing that I was referring to, and the power of incorporating visualization through styling. Unfortunately, we're at the end of the time zone, and I just didn't want to, take more time.
Yeah, we have some time.
I will take a quick shot to see if I can get this to show up. I'm going to. I apologize. Zoom is requiring additional steps.
Well, briefly, could you, Steve, could you explain what the context is? You're taking notes. Is it at a conference? It's not a live speaker or something you're reading, or you're muted, Steve.
I was saying it could be something like this call. It could be a business meeting, could be a conference. Um, it's sort of the need for speed and also the need for flagging a few things so that when you want to review it later, you can quickly sort of scan, in my case, outline view, those notes. You could say it's like important concepts or something that caught your ear, or a URL that somebody mentioned rather quickly. And then you can scan through your notes and that URL is going to pop up, or the bolded word, and that kind of thing.
Chuck, you got it? Or I'll keep talking for a second while you're working on it.
No, go ahead. Because
So I've done what you're mentioning, Steve, but I do it in a different way. Originally I started out trying to do it the way you do because I like outliners, and every note is a new, every line is a new note. But it became impractical. So if I'm at a conference where there are 3 or 4 speakers, then I just make one note for that speaker, and during their presentation, I make all of my notes about their presentation within the text of that single note. And then I can add the bolding, and if I put in a link, it'll automatically become a hyperlink, and so on. And later on, I can go back and explode that note or manually separate it into separate notes to apply whatever structure in an outline format that I want to apply, just because it's very fast to touch type into a text box and not think about structure or anything like that. And Command B and Command I are muscle memory, so you can do all that sort of formatting. That's it. That's my input.
Yes, and that's a really good alternative. If I wanted to rearrange and so on, I'd have to go through the step of exploding the notes in order to achieve that. But yeah, that would get maybe 80% of where.
But that still wouldn't give you the visual linking in the name, not in the name.
You could create an on-add action or an action of some kind. So whenever there's bold in the text, then you put a little icon there with like an exclamation point alongside the note in the outline that calls your attention to that particular note, because that means there's something in there that you want to review again. I mean, that's all very simple. Frictionless environment, I think just working within the text box, you're going to review your notes, right, at some point. So, a little bit of manual manipulation at that point might help retention.
I was going to try and show this document I was talking about. Is that appropriate at this point?
Yep.
Hopefully, can people see that?
Not yet.
Zoom unfortunately may have to be restarted to get the features that I had to add through the settings.
Welcome to mine.
Well, and to restart Zoom, you'd have to leave. So we could,
I'm gonna just forget it.
Yeah, we could do this next week.
Right.
Awesome. You want to stop sharing screen then?
I'm trying.
Yeah, Mr. Anderson, and then we can
And
wrap
just
up.
very quick thing, because I know we're over time or something, but I think that is pertinent to the sort of the discussion we're having here is a reflection on the fact that, and I think it differs for each of us, the degree to which the text exists if I can see it, and if I can't see it, it doesn't. Which sort of speaks to the thing of do I put it, and this is sorry, I hesitate to say this because it sounds like a thing that everyone could take insult at, but it is a quite simple thing, and I think understanding one's own relationship with the text is important in that sense, because yeah, if you need to see it for it to make sense to you, then you do want it in the title if you're going to say be working the outline. But it's like in the way I notice that some people use a map, they almost use it in abstract form. You know, that thing's a green triangle, that thing's a blue square. Other people want a big box with a lot of text in, because if they can't see the text on the face of the note, it might as well not exist. And that's just something else to think at. I just think it's pertinent to what we've been discussing.
So Chuck, your screen sharing worked. So you want to try it once more, and we'll close out, so we don't have to revisit it. Yeah. It all of a sudden just did render. So maybe try once more, and then we'll close out.
You see a
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
All right, so this is just an example of something I ran into. So back at the beginning of November, we had a power outage, and it just happened to hit my data center in my basement just the wrong moment. Caused some corruption of some key files in my VMware vSphere environment that just led to one problem after. So it was a great exercise in the fragility of our modern complex systems. But when I deal with problems like this, I learned a long time ago that writing down what I'm doing and capturing every little detail about the problem is extremely important to work efficiently in very complex problem solving. So here's an example of a document that I created on the fly as I was working through, and made use of styling to keep coming back and emphasizing points that were important to the problem solving too. And you'll notice that I'm copying in plain text because I'm working with multiple terminal interfaces, pulling in data from a bunch of hosts and virtual machines, vCenter consoles, pulling all this information together to create an outline of what have I discovered so far, what are the problems I'm working with, what are the observations, what have I learned. And in looking at this, you can see, the power of having a lot of styling to make it visible where I'm trying to work on a problem, and capturing a table that wasn't available for any of the other tools, but I needed to pull all this information together so I could see what was going on. That kind of thing is an example of making good use of highlighting, italicization, tables, importing text, plain text format, clarifying what you're doing, that I find to be very important to the creative writing process. And fortunately, I happen to do this in Devon thing, just an RTF file. I could do it just as well with a Tinderbox. See, just the text in a note would work just as well. And I could have done this within my email client, because often where I do is just create an email document and start typing away. So I think this just shows that, at least for some of us, the power of working with text in a stylized environment gives us a lot more tools to focus our minds on what we're writing, focus the attention of our reader on things we want to draw to their attention, and do it in a real time as you're thinking, as you're writing process. And I find this is a valuable way to work. So I just sharing this as an example. This particular document goes on for many pages. I worked on this 2 weeks, solving all the problems. And one problem got solved, but ran into another roadblock. Coloring text wound up important to emphasizing which parts of the problem I was working on. So I just throw this out. I don't know if other people work this way or not, but I find it very valuable. And I would say there's a lot of reasons why I like Tinderbox is I can drop into a textbook and, start doing this.
Love it. Hey, by the way, I just for Steve real quick. Hearing Chuck talk just made me think of this. Steve, have you ever thought of using Obsidian for that type of note taking? Because when you're working in Obsidian, you can actually say blah 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 www.yahoo.com, right? And Obsidian actually turns these things into notes. It does the bolding. And then if you want to see the actual text version of it, you then can do that and then actually see your markdown source. It might be an alternative, and then you can pull that stuff into Tinderbox when you're ready. But again, we're not trying to solve the problem, just experimenting with ideas. Beautiful. Any other thoughts, comments for today, or shall we wrap it up?
Thanks for everybody's ideas on this.
Awesome. All right, everybody. See you next week.
Bye-bye.